Welcome everyone to our 6th Mekong Water Data Hour. My name is Brian Eiler. I'm the director of the Stimson Center Southeast Asia program, and it's a delight to convene many people once again to take a deep dive into some of the cutting edge research that's coming out of the Mekong region. We've looked at issues like flooded forests, how dams are impacting the Mekong Delta, the 3S river systems, and other themes in the past. This particular topic of plastic pollution is one that is kind of near and dear to my heart because I know very little about it. But when I travel to the region, particularly going to places like Phnom Penh, growing cities in Cambodia, the Mekong Delta, Gantua, Anyang, Sadek, other cities, you can really see the evidence of pollution and plastic pollution. Sometimes dam impacts are hard to see, but this is something that is right in front of you. And we've learned that, particularly through the research of Dr. Monica Arienzo and her colleagues, of how polluted the Mekong River has become. And this is a growing area of research. And thankfully, there are a lot of solutions that can be brought to reducing and mitigating the effects of plastic pollution. So today, we're going to have a presentation of recent research from Dr. Monica Arienzo and her colleague, Rachel Kozlowski. They are going to take a deep dive into litter monitoring, I believe particularly in Cambodia, microplastic analysis and plastic pollution in the Mekong and the Tonle Sap. And then we are going to have a discussion with Diet Bui from Keep Vietnam Clean and Mark Bernturn from NGO Forum. I'll introduce them when it's time for our discussion. And we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And how you can engage with any of our speakers today is to simply write your question into the Q&A box. I'll field questions there, and then I will pose them to our speakers. It would be best if you could pose them to a particular person or just say, I've got a general question. All right, well, let's go to our featured speakers who are coming to us from the Desert Research Institute out in Reno, Nevada. It's an early morning out there for them, so we're grateful for Monica and Rachel joining us. Monica Arienzo is the Associate Research Professor of Hydrology at the Desert Research Institute. In her research, she uses chemical tools to understand how humans impact the environment. She's been studying caves in the Bahamas and ice cores in Antarctica, and now she's focusing on microplastics found in snowy peaks, downstream lakes and rivers, and in drinking water taps around the world, with much focus on the Mekong through the Wonders of the Mekong program, supported by USAID out of the University of Reno, Nevada, University of Nevada at Reno. Her colleague, Rachel Kozlowski, is a graduate research fellow at the Desert Research Institute as well. Prior to beginning her PhD, Rachel worked in the private and government sectors as a soil scientist and environmental analyst. Her research focuses on microplastics and urban runoff and microplastic movement in connected surface and groundwater systems. She likes to hang out with her dogs and is equally happy exploring wild places. And perhaps within our talk today, we can learn how Rachel found the Mekong. I imagine you're kind of new to the Mekong, how it came on your radar and some of your impressions of the Mekong system. But Monica, over to you first. And Monica, Rachel, thank you for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that. Excellent. Great. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to share with you all a little bit about the work we've been doing on the Mekong River and Tonle Sap in Cambodia. And we'd really like to take a minute to thank our collaborators, in particular the Wonders of the Mekong, who really came with us with this issue on plastic pollution and have supported our research on the Mekong River in Cambodia. And so this is just an image just showing those collaborators. So Dr. Zeb Hogan and Dr. Sudeep Chandra are the project leads for the Wonders of the Mekong. They are based at the University of Nevada, Reno. And they're the ones that came to us and said, hey, we're seeing a lot of plastic pollution in the systems we're studying. Would you be interested in studying this? And so we were very excited for the opportunity to collaborate with them. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Selah Shea. Selah is the in-country support for Wonders in the Mekong. Selah is also now working on her PhD studying plastic pollution in the Mekong River and the Tonle Sap. And so I'm going to be actually speaking about some of the preliminary data we collected that really helped kind of inform the methodologies that she's now applying as part of her PhD. So not trying to steal her thunder, I will just show some preliminary data and I'll talk a little bit more about what she's doing for her PhD. And then a big thank you to all my colleagues at DRI that have supported this work as well. So there are going to be two parts to this talk. I'm going to start by talking about the macroplastics, or these large pieces of plastic that we are studying in the Tonle Sap. And then I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who's going to be talking about these synthetic microparticles, or these small human-made particles that she's been studying as one chapter of her dissertation. So just some take-home points. What you'll see is that in the Tonle Sap, macroplastic pollution increases closer to urban areas, and we see a dominance in the macroplastics by the single-use plastics, in particular plastic bags. And then what Rachel will be showing you is that in the Mekong River, synthetic microparticles are generally more abundant downstream of cities, and fibers dominate this morphology. And some sites show more diversity in the type of particles than other sites. So before I dive into talking a little bit more about background, I wanted to first just provide some definitions. So we'll all be using this term macroplastics to mean plastic particles bigger than 5 millimeters. And so this is the plastics that you all interact with every day. So here you can see in Rachel's hand a plastic bag that we collected while we were in Cambodia. And so these are the types of plastics you all interact with. One thing I always like to highlight whenever I talk about plastic pollution is when we talk about plastic pollution, we're talking about pollution that is varied in its chemistry. So here you can see sort of the 6 main types of plastics, and you can see the varying chemistry and then the varying uses of that type of plastic. And the important thing to remember is with the varying chemistry of these different types of plastics, they then have different physical properties, right? So things like the density of these plastics vary. But then also the way these plastics interact with the environment varies. So we will have varying potentially way it's interacting with other pollutants, but then also varying ways in which these plastics may be ecotoxicologically important. Okay, so I wanted to start by talking about why we are interested in studying plastics in Southeast Asia. And prior work has shown that Southeast Asia generates a lot of mismanaged waste. And this is related to the fact that in Southeast Asia, we have large population growth occurring. We also have, we don't have a lot of centralized waste management systems in Southeast Asia. And so what happens is you have a large population, growing population, and we don't have a way to handle that waste. And so what happens is that waste escapes into the environment, and that's what we call our mismanaged waste. And then it can enter into streams and eventually into the oceans. The other reason why we're interested in studying plastics in Southeast Asia is that under a business as usual scenario, for plastic consumption, we predict that plastic production is going to double in the next 20 years. And so this is to say that we don't think this problem is going to be going away, that we think that plastic production is going to keep increasing, and then we'll continue to have this mismanaged waste issue. So as Brian introduced, we're going to be talking about the Mekong River in Cambodia. And just to orient you, the Mekong River flows from the border of Laos to the border of Vietnam. And we'll also be talking about the Tonle Sap Lake, the Tonle Sap River, which drains during the dry season from the Tonle Sap Lake to the Mekong River. And this confluence is right in the city of Phnom Penh. And so we'll be talking about, Rachel will be talking primarily about data she's collected along the Mekong River. And then I'll be talking about data we've collected on the Tonle Sap River that drains into the Mekong. So why are we interested in studying plastics in Cambodia? This is in part because there's a lot of plastic use occurring in Cambodia. And as you can see here, it's estimated 10 million plastic bags are used every day in the main city of Phnom Penh. And what we see in the data is about 42% of that trash ends up in the river. So for the city of Phnom Penh, and we think that this is probably even higher in rural areas along the river where you don't have a centralized waste management system. Additionally, to date, only 2 studies have been done on plastics, only one on microplastics and one on macroplastics in Cambodia. And so there's a lot of questions we still have about this about plastic pollution in Cambodia. And so we really see this as an opportunity to better understand plastic pollution in Cambodia, both the sources and sinks of the plastic pollution. So these are some photos that we've taken over the years of visiting Cambodia, and kind of the first thing that really struck me was the amount of litter that we see along the shorelines of the Mekong River and the Tonle Sap. And you can see here the different bags of litter that are present. Here's another example. And then I like this photo because it shows not only the mismanaged waste we see, but then also burning. And so one of the ways in which litter is managed in Cambodia and in many countries is by burning of the litter. And so this has other impacts. And we do often find actually plastic pieces that are partially charred. And so this suggests that burning isn't really an effective way to get rid of it, as that we're still seeing some of that burned plastic entering the environment. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the work we're doing. As I mentioned, Selah Shea is doing her PhD studying macroplastic pollution, and she really was the first person to kind of bring this to our attention, where she was working with local fisheries as part of her work with Wonders of the Mekong, and she started noticing a lot of this plastic pollution. And so we worked with Selah and Wonders of the Mekong to help develop the methodologies that I'll be talking about today. And the question she's interested in asking as part of her research is, what are the dominant types of macroplastics in the Tonle Sap? And are there spatial and temporal variations? And so today I'm just going to show you a snapshot we did. We've now done this sort of snapshot approach twice when we've been visiting Cambodia. And I'm really excited. I just had a wonderful chat with Selah yesterday, and she will be collecting regular data at regular intervals starting next month. And so the snapshot I'll be showing you is just kind of a hint of what maybe we'll be seeing as Selah progresses in her research. So what we did was we leveraged the stationary trawl fishing that occurs along the Tonle Sap. These are referred to as dye fisheries. And what happens is they deploy these nets into the Tonle Sap, and so that net is going to capture the migrating fish, which is what the fishermen are interested in, but also the litter. And so what we are interested in is the litter part, and so we just asked the fishermen to save the litter for us, or when we're on the boat, we collect it ourselves. And then we take that back to shore, where then we analyze the litter. These nets are typically deployed for 1 hour, at which point the contents are extracted, and then we sort them, fish versus litter. So we have 2 sites that we've been monitoring now, these 2 sort of snapshots that we've done. The first site is, I'm going to call it our more rural site. It's located just outside the city of Phnom Penh. And this is an image, hopefully it's streaming okay, because I know it can be hard to stream videos, but this is what one of those dye 1 hour hauls may look like when you're there is you could see a lot of fish, not so much litter and just first glance. And so this is sort of a typical haul. This video was from 2022 when we first went, and then I saw the same thing this past February when I was there. Okay, now I'm going to move us from our rural site to our more urban site. So this is just on the outskirts or just close to Phnom Penh. Actually, it's within Phnom Penh. And so now you can see this is, again, same calls. The net's been deployed for about an hour, and you can see just the vast difference in the catch in this more urbanized environment. And so this is what Selah brought to our attention at first, and what has really spurred this this study. So we then work with the fishermen we collect the plastics. They keep the fish, obviously, and weigh the fish, and then we can compare the litter that we have collected from the haul to the fish haul. The methodologies we use, so once we bring that litter back to shore, is we sort the litter based on material class. So if it's plastic or other materials, we then sort it by item type. And so here you can see some of those item types that we study. And then we count and weigh each category. This methodology was based on work we had been doing in the United States. And so one of the first things Rachel and I were really interested in is the methodology, these item type categories that we developed based on US data. Was it going to be applicable in Cambodia? And we did have to make some slight changes to some of these categories, but overall, the methodology has worked beautifully in Cambodia as well. And so here you can see some of our other material classes that we are interested in, things like foams, fishing gear, sanitary litter, and then we also look at things like metals and ceramics as well. So the way we do this is we have this tarp that we've developed that has the categories listed in it. We take the litter, we sort it into each of those different categories. We then go through, count and weigh each category. And then we also photograph each category. So we also have that digital image of each litter category as well. Okay, so what have we found? This is data based on just one day. We studied this in February of this year. And so what I'm showing you here is on the left side, we have our rural site. On the right side, we have the data from our urban site. And what I'm showing is in the light blue bars is the fish haul, the fish weight for each haul for both of the figures. And then in the dark blue, we have the amount of litter we caught for that corresponding haul. And so you see in the rural site is you actually can barely see the litter weights because there was, relative to the fish weight, very little litter. In the urban site, you can see, though, we have a lot more litter, a lot less fish catch, and we have sometimes even more litter by weight than fish. We can also display this as a percentage. And so again, you can see on average at the rural site, plastic weight was about 1% of the total haul weight. And this is actually consistent with what we saw in the previous year when we did a similar study. And in the urban site, we can see on average about 25% of the total haul weight was plastic. But you can see quite a bit of variability in there, and I'm happy to talk about why we think we see that. Okay, then as I mentioned, we did this categorization by item type. And so here I'm showing you by weight, the breakdown of those items for each site. Again, we have rural on the left, urban on the right. And what we see is for both sites, plastic bags are dominant by weight for both sites and also by count, actually, although I'm not showing that. And I just want to highlight one thing from this urban site. You can see we had a diaper at this site. And so if you know the weight of diapers when they are completely, what's the word I'm looking for? Completely full of water, they're quite heavy, right? And so if you look at the comparison of the diaper by percentage weight to plastic bag percentage weight, we see we have almost 2 times the amount of plastic bags by weight than diapers. And so that just gives you an idea of the amount of plastic bags we are finding if you compare it to the diapers. And so in summary, we think that the monitoring of litter from the dye fishery can help inform the sources and types of litter. And I'm really excited that Selah is taking this on as part of her PhD. And I think that there'll be some wonderful data we see from her work she's going to be leading starting this month. And what we saw is that in our rural location, about plastic weight on average was 1% of the total haul weight, while in our more urbanized location, we see that plastic weight makes up a much larger percentage, up to 25% on average. And what we saw is that plastic bags are the largest litter type by weight. All right, and so with this, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who's going to talk about her research she's doing as part of her dissertation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, and I'll be taking it away with a discussion of the work that we're doing on synthetic microparticles in the Mekong. So the focus of our work is trying to understand the differences in location, in space, and in time with season of microplastic or microparticle concentrations in the Mekong and the Tonle Sap, and trying to understand what the potential sources of those materials might be. Next slide, Monica. So first off, I just want to start off with a discussion of what synthetic microparticles are. And really, we're just talking about any human-made particle that gets into the environment that is in between 5 millimeters and 1 micrometer. So that's about the size range from a pencil eraser down to a small bacteria. Next. So this category includes microplastics, which are of the same size, but are composed of plastic polymers. And so we use the color, the morphology and the shape, and the chemistry to identify these particles. Sometimes you can't rely on just one, but when we combine them all together, we can get a good picture. So first off, when we collect our samples out in on the river, we need to bring them back to the lab. We need to process them, identify the synthetic particles, and count them, and then be able to identify what the materials are from those particles. So the first step of that is using optical microscopy. So this is where we're just using an optical microscope. We're looking at our filters. Our samples end up coming back on filters, and I'll talk about that next. Where we need to understand how many particles there are, what the mix of organic material is on that filter, so we know how to process it, and whether or not we need to subsample or do any more additional analysis before we get straight to identification. So then once we have our filters prepped and ready to go, and we're ready to identify the actual material, that's when we switch over to the infrared microscopy. So we're using an Fourier transformed infrared microscope, which shoots infrared light directed at each individual particle. And then we're able to measure the light that is reflected as opposed to the light that's absorbed by that particle on the vibrations. And that makes sort of a fingerprint, which we call a spectra. And that spectra can be compared against libraries of known materials so that we can actually identify what that particle is made of. And this is really important, especially in the Mekong for our identification process, because a lot of the particles that we find in the river have been in there long enough. The river is very biologically active, so we have a lot of organic material and staining that happens on those particles, and it ends up where it's really difficult to distinguish natural materials from synthetic materials if you're not using an infrared microscope, just because they all kind of look the same. Next. Okay, so what do these particles look like? Now, these are all very clean ones. I just told you that my Mekong particles look very similar, and their shape is different, but their color for my Mekong particles is all brown. But in a lot of other systems, when we're finding these particles, we find them as fragments and fibers and spheres. I would say fragments and fibers are definitely the dominant categories that we find. And these usually are plastic particles or synthetic particles that have broken off of a larger material and then are degrading in the environment. So these fibers often come from textiles, from clothing, or from like even woven synthetics, tarps, materials like that. They just fray off and they get loose in the environment. The same thing with these fragments. They're small pieces of larger materials that just get degraded in the environment, and then they get to the small size that's very difficult to manage. We refer to those as secondary microplastics. And then there's also pellets and spheres, which are typically created in that shape by a manufacturer for a specific purpose. So although it's been outlawed in some areas, an example of this would be small plastic spheres or pellets that are used in hygiene products like toothpaste and scrubs and things like that as a sort of abrasive. So it's not common in a lot of countries to find that anymore, but we still occasionally see them in the environment. So here's just some more example of all the different colors and the types of fibers that we sometimes see. These are very small. It's hard for you to see looking down at the scale, but I think the scale on most of these is 250 microns. So these are some larger fibers, but often when I'm finding them in the environment, they are probably about the same size as the scale bar that you might see on one of these, and that would be the total length of a lot of the particles. All right, so now I want to jump back to actual discussion of our samples from the Mekong. So we've been collecting, or when we did go and sample our Mekong River sites, we are sampling in the middle of the stream from a boat, which allows us to eliminate some of the effects of the shoreline. And we're also sampling right at the water surface. So this is just an example of our sampling setup, and I'll talk through this a little bit. So if you look over on the right, you'll see that silver pipe going into the water. Thank you, Monica, yes. So that is the inlet where we have a tube connected to a filter where we're pulling river water in from the water surface. It then is pushed by this gray box here in the middle. That is the pump that is pulling that water out of the river. And then the pump ultimately pushes that water through this tubing into this stacked filter system. So we use 3 filters in line with our largest aperture filter on top and our smallest aperture filter on the bottom. That allows us to capture all of the microparticles that are in that water that are larger than our smallest filter. So about 20 microns or higher. We can capture those synthetic particles and trap them on the filters and then take them back to the lab for analysis. What we're doing with the bucket is we're measuring the total volume of water that we have pumped. So there's graduations on that bucket we use, and we aim for between 20 to 100 liters, depending on the site and depending on the quality of the water. But knowing the volume that we've pumped and the number of particles that we capture on the filters, we're able to get to a particles per liter quantification of what we have sampled. So there's a method for this, and if you're interested, you can check it out. This is the published method that we're following for our filtration and pump method. Okay, so on the Mekong, we visited 2 times to collect samples. We visited in February 2022, which was in the dry season, and then in July of 2022, which is in the wet season. So we collected 14 sites along the main stem of the Mekong River in the dry season. It's about 575 kilometers. And then when we returned in July, we added a few more sites, so including those 14 sites, but adding a few extra sites where there was some curiosity or interest about the numbers that we were getting, preliminary numbers from our dry season work. And we also included some blanks and some replicates just to add some quality control for our work. Also, the wet season work included a little more on the Tonle Sap as well. So what I'm going to be presenting now is a discussion of some of the preliminary data from our dry season analysis. Okay, so this is just an overview of where our sample sites are located along the Mekong. So the Mekong is huge, but we are studying just this portion of it that is in Cambodia. So it works out well because there's a large dam right on the border of the Mekong, on the border with Laos on the Mekong. So our samples begin sort of in this large dam-free stretch of the river in Cambodia. We tried to locate our samples above and below urban areas so that we can capture the impact of that human environment on the river. Okay. All right, so these are just some bubble plots showing relative size of the or relative concentration of the synthetic particles at some of these sites. So you'll notice in the capital city of Phnom Penh, we have some of our highest concentrations. And then over in some of the more rural areas, we have much smaller concentrations. But then you'll notice up here in this area that's called the Triple S Junction, we also have some really high concentrations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. In general, we're seeing more synthetic particles downstream of these urban areas, which is to be expected. Okay. So additionally, we're finding that our sites are dominated by fibers, significantly dominated. So in the majority of our sites, we find more than like 70 to 90% of the actual synthetic particles that we're getting out of that river are fibers. And you can go on to the next slide. The dominant fiber that we're finding is this one that I'm showing you here. It's a blunt-ended 100 to 200 micrometer long fiber, and it's often found in mats, and it's found inside of another plastic foam material, which we believe is Teflon material. And we, based on the FTIR analysis that we've done in comparison with other libraries, we believe that these are milled glass fibers made out of silicon dioxide glass. So generally talking about what materials we're finding in our samples, as I just said, the majority of what we're finding are these glass fibers. And we're sampling at the surface, so these fibers are all floating on the surface of the water. Potential sources for these can be insulative tape, where these glass fibers are used as a heat protection embedded within a larger plastic matrix. They're also used as filters and masks and things like that. They're also used in building materials. So there's a lot of potential sources. We also find polycarbonate, which is used in hardened plastic products like headlights for cars, plastic components of vehicles, sunglasses. We also find polyester, which is a common textile, polyvinyl chloride, which is used in industrial applications, sometimes in textiles, but then also very commonly in plumbing. And then we do find some natural materials, including natural polyamides, or natural polymers, and those could be silk, wool, nylon. We also find jute and hemp in that river, as well as some other natural materials. All right, so I want to just give a quick overview of the stuff that we've talked about here. So in general, as Monica said, when we're looking at macroplastic, we're finding the pollution increases closer to the urban areas, and that it's really dominated by single-use plastics and plastic bags. Not a surprise, but it's good to have it quantified. And the work that Selah and that Monica's team is doing to understand the changes in macroplastic concentration can really be used to help inform policy. And as far as the microplastic particles are concerned, we're definitely finding that there are more of them downstream of urban areas, and that these fibers are dominating. So there's differences between sites where we see some sites have more fibers or less, or more of other plastic materials and less of others. But we have a lot more work to be done there to look at the differences in seasonality and differences in location. So as I said, this is our preliminary work. We're still processing samples. We're still interpreting the data. But this work will help us understand the potential environmental impacts of this human waste on of this synthetic waste on the Mekong and the Tonle Sap. And we also hope that these data will help inform plastic reduction efforts and be useful to the people who are out there on the ground trying to make good policy happen. Next slide. So this includes the UN Treaty on Plastic Waste, which is in process right now, but Cambodia is a signatory to it. And we know that folks in Cambodia are working hard to try to get ahead of the plastic pollution issue and try to make some solutions. So it's our sincere hope that these data will be useful for the people who are working to improve the situation, and that they can provide a baseline and some monitoring information as they move forward. And that's it. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're looking forward to discussion.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Monica. Wow, you know, that the video and the comparison video of the dye fishery is just jarring, right? To see this horrible mess coming out of the river system, and also to think that, you know, the fish that are consumed by people are picked out of, you know, a heap of junk and plastics. It's just it's quite horrifying to see. You know, this, I failed to mention at the beginning of my introduction, this series itself is supported by the Mekong US Partnership through the State Department. Your work, by and large, supported by USAID, Wonders of the Mekong. You know, this is probably one of the best examples of USAID dollars at work that I can think of identifying a problem, demonstrating its transboundary impacts, showing the methods on how to monitor and measure what's happening, bring solutions, and importantly, USAID has the new directive to localize, right? So you're empowering Selah, who we probably should have had on this call to be a change maker in this space. So again, just kudos to all your efforts. Just one observation before we go to the discussants, and we'll pivot very quickly to the discussants. You know, I think a lot of the time we imagine that the large urbanizing areas, Phnom Penh, Can Tho, larger cities in Cambodia are kind of the bigger source point for the pollution. We think about Laos, 7 million people upstream, less densely populated. Vientiane, population of about 1 million, contributing into this transboundary issue. But we often forget about Northeast Thailand. And Northeast Thailand has 22 million people living along the rivers there, more people than in Cambodia. And their plastic is going into the Moon and Chi River system that then flows into the Mekong. So there's a lot of point source to examine, I think, in Northeast Thailand. And perhaps that's what's contributing to the microplastics that you found around Stung Treng and Don Sahong. But over to our discussants. Bunthern, you're there in Phnom Penh. We have Mac Bunthern joining us from Phnom Penh. He leads the Rivers work of the NGO Forum, which is a member organization of NGOs and civil society organizations in Phnom Penh. Bunthern, he was just telling us earlier about how the Mekong was flooding around him. How did this presentation resonate with you and your work and your observations in Phnom Penh? Bunthern, over to you.
Thank you, Brian, Monica, and Rachel for the precise presentation. It is important to learn from your studies, and plastic waste management in Cambodia is, you know, it's kind of emerging issues that the country has to pay more attention to, because the population grew in the cities, and as well as the the poor waste management system in the country will exacerbate the the pollution in the cities, and as well as in the rural area as well. Actually, we NGO work has been working on the Mekong issues and looking at the impacts from the infrastructure's development. Plastic is not in our areas, but it is interesting for us to take into account and look further in the futures, if possible for us. And the findings from your studies provide us more insights and concerns and the how the plastic pollution in the Mekong rivers as well as the Tonle Sap, which is freshwater sources, not for fish but also for human, for the water consumption and so on and so forth. I interested in the in your study, and especially you try to quantify the plastic pollutions in the rivers. But I also interested in the what is the matter of the pollution, why you have to take care about these issues, what problem might have on the health of human health as well as the the fish, whether fish affected the fish population there and health of the fish and so on and so forth. Yeah, this is the first question, and my question could both of you could provide an answer. Thank you.
Sure. Monica, Rachel?
All right, I'll take a stab at this one. So we are not fishery biologists, and we haven't been studying the fisheries work in the Mekong, but we do understand that there has been significant change in those fisheries and a lot of concern about them. So it's hard to say where microplastics and macroplastics fit into the picture. There have been studies that show that these types of plastic in the environment with aquatic species cause stress, but we don't know the degree that microplastics or macroplastic waste is contributing to fisheries decline. So yes, it's a stressor, but we don't know how much. And we really, there's more work that needs to be done. I'm sorry, was there another one that I missed in there?
Or Monica, did you want to respond?
I think Rachel answered that perfectly. And I think there's just a lot of work that needs to be done, more broadly understanding ecotoxicological effects of plastics, but also human health effects. And I know that the state of California out here in the US is really trying to tackle that from a water quality standpoint. But yeah, these are just really big concerns that definitely are going to require a lot more scientists and a lot more research to be done.
I can say one thing is that a lot of the studies that have looked at the effect of plastic waste on aquatic species, they're often done at higher concentrations. And one difference that we're seeing between the Mekong and some other rivers is there's higher concentrations of these plastics in the Mekong than we see in other areas. So I think if there is a stressful situation for aquatic species, it's likely that the Mekong is going to get there faster than some areas, just because of the higher numbers that we're seeing relative to other global waters.
Okay, thank you for your feedback, and I would like to add my comment, and what I have learned so far is that when plastic when was discarded into the rivers, and it's later on it will become a microplastic, and then the fish confuse the microplastic as their food, and then fish eats the microplastic and come into the body of the fish and stomachs of the fish, and then fishers catch the fish and eat the fish and become a a cancerous disease for the human health. So it is something that we learn, but we don't have any kinds of evidence being conducted so far in Cambodia. Maybe in other regions they conduct this study, but hopefully that this study would be focused to conduct up and downs and deep studies, and because in Cambodia we have a lot of fresh water as well as fish as the main protein for the Cambodian people.
Well, that's particularly important, Bunterm, because 60 to 70% of Cambodia's population's animal protein intake comes from freshwater fish catch. That's one of the highest proportions in the world, if not the highest, for an entire country's population. So the exposure to the plastic pollution that we've talked about and learned about today is potentially very high. So again, pathfinding work that you're all doing, Monica and Rachel, for pointing the need for more studies and more work to find out and discover what's happening. Thank you, Bunter, for those comments and questions. We're going to now hear from Winot Diep. Diep is calling in from Hanoi, where she is the co-director of Keep Vietnam Clean, which works on plastic pollution issues. So Diep, in addition to your comments, can you give us a very brief, less than 1 minute introduction to what Keep Vietnam Clean does? Oh, and I must also say that we met Diep through the Track 1.5 policy dialogue process supported by the Mekong U.S. Partnership at our Nature-Based Solutions Conference in Bangkok last year. And she's been a great colleague. I've gotten to know her work, gotten to know her a bit over the last couple of months. And Diep, thanks for joining us. Diep, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian and Stimson, for having me today. So my name is Diep. I'm from Hanoi, Vietnam, working for Keep Vietnam Clean, and we focusing on waste management, like climate change issues, and then we one of the part that we mainly like educate public about plastic waste, and we also like have a citizen science project like to identify pollution spot in mainland. So yeah.
Thank you. What about responses or questions?
Oh yeah, right. Sorry. Oh yeah, yeah.
And again, congratulations on your work, Diep. You guys.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to my introduction.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that what your study very interesting. So because Vietnam has a long coastline, and it's very heartbroken to me personally when I travel everywhere from north to the south. I can see plastic like from in the very remote areas, like isolated to the most isolated beach in coastline Vietnam. Still like plastic is everywhere, and well, I think one of that is that one of the things I can see that yes, there are a lot of plastic bags, but we're not really sure like is that it's like a majority of that is plastic bag. And also one of the things we find that fishing gear, because when we have a site visit in some like island in Vietnam, like so the government told us like majority of the waste is from the mainland, and it's caused a big issue to them because they had to handle all that I don't know, like leaking charge. And other parts is like from the fishing boat. We found like very plastic string because from the fishery, and yes, we understand like it's cause pollution in Vietnam, especially in the coastline. But at the same time, we also think most of fisheries people, the majority of them are like how should say that, in working class, and they are poor. And if we want to protect environment, but at the same time, how we can engage them into to the work, and also help them to improve the livelihood while reduce the pollution. Other than that, it's very hard to see sustainable, how to keep it sustainable in the long-term run. And so, yeah, and I think my question is that, do you think about it's like research on like how relation between like plastic, microplastic, and human health, how to quantify the amount of plastic could affect our health? Because I mean, like, people like can see if it's a threat, it's to their health or their benefits, so that maybe they can they're more motivated to take action. And also, my question number 2 is that, have you thought about like compare between plastic pollution or microplastic in like Mekong Delta region or Asian areas, and in like other areas like USA or more developed country?
Awesome. Thank you, Deep, for those wonderful comments and questions. I want to just touch on something that you actually didn't frame it as a question, but I think is a really important discussion. And I really love studying litter, because I think there's a lot of really interesting questions that come from the study of litter, from the sociological aspect as well as the scientific kind of questions on what are sources and sinks and impacts. But one of the things you talked about is, you touched on sort of who bears responsibility for litter. And I think that that's a really important question, right? I think it's often, I think that there's a lot of discussions now on extended producer responsibility, right? So putting responsibility on producers of plastic, of primary plastics in particular, and thinking about, rather than, putting a tax on plastics and that goes on to the consumer, but thinking about on the producer's end, ways we can reduce plastics from the start. And so I think that that's something that you kind of touched on in thinking about the fishing groups that are using plastic pollution and or generating plastic pollution, and ways maybe to not bear that responsibility on the fishermen that are using it. And I think that kind of that also made me think of the Asian, some of the work that's been done there in the Asian groups of thinking about ways to combat marine debris. And there's a really wonderful document that the regional action plan there on thinking about these types of topics. As far as human health, I think there's just more work needs to be done. And, as a hydrologist, I definitely try to not try to veer too much into thinking about commenting on human health effects, as that is sort of outside of my area of expertise. But we do work with individuals who think about these things, and it's obviously top of mind. And there's a wonderful database that's being developed called Tomex, and this is a great place to start to compile these ecological and health effects of plastic pollution. And so I think we'll see more efforts to bring together data sets to understand that. And the last question was on plastic pollution in the Mekong compared to other areas. I'm going to pass that to Rachel, actually, to quickly touch on that, as I know we're nearing the top of the hour.
Sure. Yeah, so relatively speaking, Cambodia and other Southeast Asian countries have much higher concentrations of macroplastic waste and microplastics. As far as the data is showing right now, there's a lot of limited data issues in Southeast Asia because a lot of the microplastic work has been done in the northern latitudes and other countries. So from what we can see so far, the concentrations seem to be much higher in Cambodia and in other Southeast Asian countries. And that goes back to what Monica was introducing at the beginning, and sort of what we've talked about in the group a bit, is that the populations have just grown rapidly and expanded faster than the waste management system can accommodate. And in a lot of these areas, there's just very few options for people when they have generated plastic waste of how to dispose of it properly. And so while the actual consumption numbers of like how much plastic waste is being used by each person is not terribly different from other developing countries or developed countries, it's the disposal end of it that makes the problem.
Thank you, Rachel, for that clarification. We're going to jump to our Q&A, and these questions, yep, you're free to answer. Bunten, you're free to answer as well. And we'll try to get through some of them in the remaining 5 minutes that we have here. But just a quick contextual question for Rachel or Monica. How long do these microplastic and microplastic particles take to fully degrade? That comes from John Brandon from the Asia Foundation.
Yeah, so quickly, it's going to vary depending on the type of plastic, what it's made out of, kind of the exposure to UV light and other factors that can degrade those plastics. I think this is a really big question that also hasn't been fully understood yet, but the timescales are quite long, hundreds of years at least, I'd say. Is that probably right, Rachel? So.
Yeah, there's a big diff. So when we say to fully break down, we mean a polymer actually degrading into monomers or smaller pieces and not interacting in the environment the way that plastic would. So, you know, the microplastic fragments can be formed relatively quickly depending on abrasion or exposure. But for those particles to actually break all the way down and no longer be a plastic, that's what takes a really long time.
And it's to think that we use them for sometimes 5 minutes, right? And they last so long in the environment.
Yeah.
What about collection depth in the river? This comes from Jim Best. Does microplastic particle density vary? And how do the particle numbers change with depth of the river and then spatially within the river cross sections?
So great question. So there's already been work, actually, the other study that was done in Cambodia did look at surface and depth and then along a transect along the width of the river. And it does vary. So the surface will have the highest concentrations and it does decline. And that's been shown not only in the Mekong and Cambodia, but in other riverine systems as well. We chose the surface to study partially for ease of sampling, because we're talking about a pretty deep river. And so where are you sampling? And then that also allows us to compare to other work we're doing, because we've applied this methodology now in other riverine systems.
Thank you. Now, just to get through more of these questions before we conclude, Darius Sadigi from Princeton University and Can Tho University there in Vietnam has asked, is there any monitoring work done on a transboundary scale that you know of, crossing national borders along the Mekong River?
It's a great question. And I think Rachel's microparticle data will probably be one of the first data sets to ask that question, because we do have samples pretty close to the Vietnam border. But I think there's way more could be done looking at macroplastics as well. So great question and future work for sure.
Yeah, well, and that, you know, there are very few communities right on the Cambodia's border with Laos. There are communities up there. None of them are urban. So what you're finding right at the Cambodia-Laos border is all coming from the river in Laos, but that again is contributed from Thailand, from China, from Laos as well. So again, opening windows for more studies. And there was a question in here about, is there evidence that plastic upstream is coming from China or Myanmar, making its way to Cambodia? there might not be much evidence. I think it's safe to assume that that is happening, though.
Yeah, actually, one of the ways we thought we could get at this question was actually taking the plastic litter and actually looking at the packaging to understand where maybe it came from. It hasn't worked yet, but that's an idea.
Kind of, but I guess so. But a lot of the packaging in Laos is now shipped in from China, so it's hard to say, did it start in China or is it just like say a Chinese agricultural plantation? Once we tried to track a load of bananas that were upended in the Mekong River in the Golden Triangle in plastic bags, actually, as they moved downstream, and they were in Chinese marked bags, but the upending happened in Thailand. Okay, let's see one more question. A lot of the questions have to do with what can be done here. Among your scope of things, are you seeing some countries take steps, whether it's in the Mekong or just by the country itself, say in Thailand, to mitigate and to reduce the problem? And then if not, or if so, what are some practical measures that could help people economically and help them reduce their plastic waste?
I think it speaks to this exactly this question, the fact that Bunter and Deep are doing work in country to tackle this issue, and practical applications. I think a lot of it's going to come down to policies and those types of pressures to change plastic use, both around the world. And I personally am very excited about the UN treaty to reduce plastic pollution, and I would highly recommend people look through the Zero draft, because I think that there's a lot of really exciting parts to there, and happy to send that around if you can't find that document. I don't know, does anyone else want to comment on this question? Because it's definitely a complicated question.
Yeah, what about you? What do you think can be done? What are some of the steps Vietnam is taking to reduce plastic pollution?
I would say, yeah, I agree with you, like Monica. First, it should be a collective action coming from the government. For now, the local government, our government try to have impulse like circular economy, and secondly, EPA extended responsible producer responsible. But it's very new to both private sector and public sector. And then it's also coming from we need to more like I support in terms of facility and more research, particularly on how it could affect the health and where the source of the plastic where it's coming from, and then first of all from government, secondly from citizen, they need to be more educated about these issues. Like I say, if they see, like before my comment before, if they are aware about how serious, how it could affect them directly in terms of health, those hopefully they could change. And then the private sector from companies, they also need to change their business model to or redesign their packaging so that it could help to reduce the waste to avoid the burdens of the waste management current waste management system, and secondly avoid leaking into the environment. So yeah, it's complicated issues, but we get to that. I think.
Thank you, Zep. Bunter, you put your hand up there. Bunter.
Okay. Well, as for the practical recommendation and solutions in Cambodia, I mean, refer to the context of Cambodia. First is awareness raising, behavioral change campaigns that could be done to ensure that the education to the public has been taken into account in order to educate people how the impact of plastic bags and also the waste management system. Secondly, improve the waste system management in Cambodia, and I think it's not only in Cambodia, but country in the region also, especially in the developing world, and provide a alternative packagings, and that could be replace the usings of the plastic and plastic bag and so on and so forth, and also change the way of packaging system, packaging system work in the country. For instance, provide alternatives, more alternative source to the the consumers, and the last one is policy. In Cambodia, we have one sub-degree which is developed in 2000, I think 2016, and 2016 on the prohibitions of the plastic, the productions, distributions and usage of the plastic, but it doesn't work and it doesn't enforce because it's affect majority of the poor people, because they use consume plastic as a as a food, as a life, and so on. So this is my comment and suggestion for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bunturn. Rachel, Monica, any closing remarks or closing responses before we wind down our Mekong Water Data Hour plus 5 minutes?
I guess I would just say that it's a big problem, but there's a lot of people working on it, and I'm really gratified to see the global attention that plastic waste and mismanaged waste has been getting. And I think as more people focus on the issue and pay attention to it, then I think we will see progress. And I acknowledge, like what you said, Bunturn, it's difficult, and often the people on the ground really don't have a lot of choice. But there are country level and regional level projects in the works to make improvements. And I think just keeping the discussion going and getting people aware so that they can advocate for themselves and their communities is really the best way to go.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Bunturn and Ziep, from calling in from your respective stations on the globe, in Nevada, Phnom Penh, and Hanoi. This has been a really, kind of a sobering conversation to learn so much about the stage of pollution that's happening in the Mekong system. But I found a lot of optimism both in the data and the methods that you've outlined with us today, Monica and Rachel, and then to hear Bunturn and Ziep talk about the solutions. And when I asked Bunturn to serve as a discussant, he goes, Brian, I'm not an expert on plastic, but he's listed off a number of very viable and actionable solutions that could be enacted in Cambodia. So thank you all for joining us. Again, I want to thank the Mekong US Partnership for supporting our Mekong Water Data Hour series. We've got more to do, so if any of you listening in have new and emerging research on Mekong water related issues, please get in touch. We'd be happy to highlight your research here. Until next time, be well.